Welcome to the webinar, The Paper and the Data. We're going to talk about new journal practices for data and software affecting our authors, reviewers, and editors for any Earth, Space, and Environmental Science journal. And I have with me Randy Towson, who's AGU's Director of Publications Operations. And also, although Erin is not with us on this recording, she has been instrumental in developing these slides and supporting the original presentation of this material at the Ocean Science meeting held in February 2020. So I just want to acknowledge her contribution to this content. Randy, how are you today?
I'm very well, Shelley. Thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Let's introduce our modules. So we'll have 5 altogether for our agenda, and you should be able to access all 5 recordings with their slides. And with, why don't we get started? So we'll introduce all of our content here, and then we'll talk more specifically about data in Module 2, software in Module 3, peer review in Module 4, and the importance of persistent identifiers in Module 5. There are a couple slides giving you links to the resources we've used for these materials, and we'll provide access to those as well. The slides will be on Zenodo. And you can use the title of this presentation to locate those. All right, let's get going. So for our introduction, Peter Brewer is an editor-in-chief of AGU's JDR Oceans Journal. And just a couple years ago, he wrote an article in EOS, and it's titled, "Do You Expect Me to Give Away My Data?" And he explained his experience trying to collect data for an article in another journal and was incredibly challenged with getting the data points. He has been instrumental in the work AGU has been doing around data leadership and is a great role model for behavioral change. Within AGU's work, we have a data position statement that affirms the Earth and space science data are a world heritage, and that it's very important to share and preserve and use data ethically, document and give fair credit. You can find this entire position statement on AGU's website. And Peter, along with all of the AGU volunteer and staff, support make decisions every day having to do with this the importance of this position statement. So going on to the EOS article that Peter wrote, he was trying to highlight how important data sharing is, and through his experience with this particular article he wrote, and he said as an editor-in-chief that the most correspondence he receives when it comes to reviewing articles has to do with the challenges around data reporting and the fact that AGU has evolved over time to no longer allow the statement that data is available by contacting the author. That just doesn't work, and his article reflects that. So the article he wrote was in the UK's Royal Society discussion meeting, and there was not one person that he spoke to, keeping in mind these are his peers and he's known them for quite some time, that said yes, they were happy to share their data. Instead, he got all kinds of excuses, and he goes on to explain that. And to give you a sense for some of the challenges, if you look at the picture here, the diagram, you can see that the data points he was collecting from each of the other scientific papers fall in this line, upper left to lower right. And there's this odd line going fairly straight up, and he was absolutely certain that there was something wrong with how the data had been collected. And the particular colleague involved, you can see he cites the fact that they had some poor eyesight and no longer able to actually validate that data. So sadly, it was not possible to make sure the quality of this data. So Peter goes on in the paper to talk about how it's important that all of the numbers, everything behind the publication, the research, the graphs, needs to be very specific, which I completely agree with, and that we need to do better, and we need to value the fact that our data is important to our research, needs to be shared, and it's something that we can actually get credit for and be recognized for. And to go on, there are two publications from the National Academies to share with you to help emphasize the importance of sharing data, open data. One recently in 2018 called Open Science by Design, and I highlighted some of the specific recommendations having to do with data, the importance of culture around sharing, training, the importance of robust preservation, and that we want to follow the FAIR principles. We don't go into detail in these modules about the FAIR principles, but we do talk about their characteristics in a more broad way. The other paper from the National Academies is Reproducibility and Replicability in Science, and it also highlights importance of computational methods and data products, making sure it's clear that all of the relevant uncertainties have been provided, which gives trust in the kind of how the data was used, and the information about quality, that those results are reported on how they were reached, that we provide proper training, and we don't overstate implications of research in order to avoid miscommunication. So data being a first-class research product, this image comes from the Research Data Alliance. One of their plenary sessions some years back, they had an artist working with them, and they talk about the fact that data is not treated as important as our scientific publications. But I add a little bit of bringing it more forward to what we're trying to do today is that we do care about publication and the data and the software, in ensuring that it is cited, it is preserved, and it provides credit to those who have been the authors for that important research product. So we have new author guidelines. These have been developed broadly across the entire community, and AGU has gone through the process of implementing them, making it more strict within our journals just recently in late 2019. So we'll have an opportunity to walk through those. Let me see what the next slide is. Yeah, before I head there, Randy, do you want to talk about the process that AGU went through to adopt the guidelines?
Sure, absolutely. So recognizing the volume of people that we need to communicate with, and the tremendous undertaking it will be to move the scale from one end to the other, we really partnered, first of all, with our editorial boards. We have more than 700 editors and associate editors across our journals, and really working with them to, everyone understood the need for open data, but really the way in which you do it is varying depending on where you sit. Our editors really stress the importance of communicating with our authors and providing resources for the authors. And because the different types of data that people use varies so differently within our 22 journals, really working with the individual editors to understand what the unique needs were was really critical. And then identifying the different areas and touch points and communication opportunities that we had was really pivotal in establishing a plan to move forward. So we had a lot of webinars, we had a lot of exchanges, a lot of communications. Sometimes you're tearing the Band-Aid off really, really rough to spark the conversations. Initially we had a difficult time getting our editors to talk among one another, despite the conversations we were having about, these changes coming. But really tearing the Band-Aid off sparked the conversations that were critical to begin to say, okay, this is going to be challenging. What do we need to move forward? And the contributions just really poured in, and we were able to develop a lot of resources based on that feedback and their guidance.
Yeah, you're hitting on those points of culture change and what it takes to encourage folks that have done their science in a certain way for a long time to actually do it differently, and then be the role model as part of the journal community to show others how to do it. So really proud of all of our editors, staff at AGU to make this work.
Yeah, Shelley, I think what you highlighted from Peter Brewer as well, everyone agrees in theory it's a great idea, and then when it comes to them, they're like, oh, my data too, and like, yes, your data as well. So really think of it from that perspective.
Exactly. Oh, that's a really good point. All right. So there was an effort that AGU helped to convene a project called the Enabling Fair Data Project. And one of the outputs from that effort, which included a number of the journals, Science participated, Taylor and Francis participated later in the process. We had PLOS and Elsevier, two members, one member from each of those organizations were the co-chairs of one of our working groups, and a number of other journals helped to build these author guidelines. They were vetted by not only the journal community, but also repository and other stakeholders within our broad scientific space. And they're published within Scientific Editor, which is a journal for the Council for Science Editors. And they'll walk you through what all of the elements are and what the thinking was at the time of publication. And we've, as Randy has indicated, we've learned about actual implementation as we've gone. The author guidelines still hold, but we have improved how we actually do the implementation over time. So to summarize them, there's two slides. One talks about putting data within a repository that's aligned to the FAIR principles. And we make it really clear for researchers what that means. They don't necessarily have to have memorized what the FAIR principles are. And there's some flexibility because not all repositories can fully support the FAIR principles, but they're evolving and getting there. And so we have guidance for authors as to how to pick repositories. And then it's very important to then cite your data within your paper. That may seem kind of strange because sometimes that data is brand new and we're not used to something new associated with our research in our citation section. But in fact, that's exactly where it needs to go in order for it to give you credit. It comes through the infrastructure for journals and data. We'll talk more about that in later modules, but that's important for citation. And then it's also important to identify the availability of that data within an availability statement. Now, some journals put those in different locations within the structure of a publication. AGU has just recently evolved from including availability statements in our acknowledgement section to its own section called open research. So that's where we're expecting availability statements to go now. And something to keep in mind is sometimes your data is not in a repository because you've reused it from someone else. And you need to explain where it is, and you may or may not be able to actually cite it the way we would like. As we evolve over time and the practices of sharing data in a repository become more commonplace, it will be more aligned. The availability statements and the citations will be more aligned and they'll be one for one. But we do see challenges with proper citations for certain conditions that we'll have to work through as we all learn these new practices. The first and the third bullet go together. If I were to rewrite the author guidelines, I probably would have written them a little bit differently to make that more clear. But we do want the data to be as unrestricted as possible, to be as open as possible. But the third bullet indicates that there is lots of data out there that requires protection of some kind. Think of fossil data, endangered species. The indigenous community has rights where some of their or all of their data needs to be protected. And those are absolutely valid reasons for not having your data open. However, if you just randomly say, I'm not going to make my data open, and there's no reason for that that falls into these categories or similar categories, then you'll have pushback from the publications team or your editors, letting you know that your reasoning is not going to work, and you need to actually provide access. The second bullet talks about a tool that we've built called the repository finder tool. DataCite built it for us. They are one of the preferred data registry organizations, and it's one way for you to identify an appropriate repository. And AGU is and others are also working on other ways to help you identify appropriate repositories. All right, so Randy, this is a really good slide to share how this all came to be from AGU's guidance side.
Yeah, this was a really fun project. Once again, this is where we ripped the Band-Aid off. You know, we were trying to improve our enforcement of open data, and we kind of did it in certain phases, letting the authors know, communicating with them when they first entered the peer review process, that there was going to be a higher threshold of that we were expecting them to get to. At a certain point, and that point we determined was in August of 2019. So in August 2019, we had another webinar, Shelley and I, for our editors to let them know that the date has come. We were going to make this change. And as I expected, there was a lot of conversation about what that meant and how we needed to communicate to all the appropriate people. And there was a lot of open communication, but really there was also a lot of side emails that came through to say, Randy and Shelley, I understand what you want to do, but you're missing X, Y, and Z. And that's where we start to really have the most powerful and critical engagements, weren't necessarily the public forum, but more in the private conversations, because like I said, in theory, everybody wanted to do this and thinks it's a great idea. But really wanting to contribute, we found a lot of value. So of those conversations, we started to develop what you see in front of us, which is a screenshot from a data for publication page. The resources that are here and the guidance that we have on this web page is really the result of critical conversations that came from across our editors. And once you start having a body of conversation that you can demonstrate that to the broader population of editors, they start to get on board. They start to understand that, we're not just doing this to them. Our intent is to do it with them. And we're trying to do it throughout the year, but it wasn't really until we tore that Band-Aid off that they recognized their ability or their invitation to contribute. And we started getting more contributions and more guidance, and it really shaped the direction of what we're doing. We have a lot more resources that we're planning on, but it's all in coordination with the community. They're really helping us to drive this. We can't do this for them. We need to do this with them, and it's critical that their partnership is very, very much a part of all of this.
Yep. So there's 4 sections here, and we do have planned very shortly a page like this having to do with software. So let's go on. So why is it that you care about sharing your data, sharing your software? So let's articulate that. It's important that you consider data its own research product and you cite it. You get credit for that citation, and we can work with you to make sure that you get as accurate a citation as possible. And we'll talk about that in this next module. It's important that when you provide data in a repository that's separate from your publication, you can actually get access to that in different sorts of search mechanisms that can lead to other possible collaborators. Remember, not everyone who's interested in your data is necessarily going to be part of your particular scientific domain. And sometimes it's hard to know if the data that's used within a particular research paper is going to be something useful to you. So coming at it from a particular repository, you might actually get more insight into that data and find new collaborators in other domains. We're supporting reproducibility and replicability. We're building more trust in science. Many funders are now requiring that we have our data shared with a citation. And of course, AGU and many other publishers are also requiring that as well. So this is the end of Module 1. Thank you so much for being part of this, and I hope you enjoy the remaining modules.